Welcome back to Silver the Hedgehog Reads Chapter 11 of The Walking Dead, Hope. I'm Silver the Hedgehog. Now let's continue where we left off. Lewis looked to his left, where Lizzie stood with her rifle trained on the bar. He gestured for her to lower it. She begrudgingly did. He approached them with his arms raised. "I'm coming for you," he said. "Are you Mike and Chris?" He turned the corner and saw the two men sitting against the wall behind the counter. One of them, a tall, blond man with a shaggy beard, was kneeling beside his friend, who was clenching his stomach as if his life depended on it. It probably did, Lewis thought. Blood stained on the man's shirt, spiderwebbing toward his chest. "Yeah," the blond man said slowly. "Who are you?" he inquired, with a raised eyebrow, his eyes never leaving Lewis. "Name's Lewis. This is Lizzie." He gestured to the woman behind him. "Maggie sent us here to check on you. She seemed you to think you might have gotten into trouble." "And she was dead on," Lizzie commented with a bored tone, leaning on the bar. The blonde stood up, dusting himself off. "We ran into a bunch of walkers when we were trapped to get in that back office. They cornered us and we got trapped." Lizzie looked around at the now deserted bar, rotten bodies littering the floor every few feet. "Well, they're gone now. Let's go," she said sharply, clapping her hands together. Both men shared a worried glance, pursing their lips. Chris took Mike's hand and nodded. The man on the floor straightened up with effort and lifted his blood-stained shirt up. Once his abdomen was a pulsing bite mark. Over his abdomen was a pulsing bite mark. Few rotten teeth still clinging to the torn skin. "One of the walkers got the jump on me," he explained, looking down at it. "Chris got it, but it was too late. I couldn't just leave him," exclaimed Chris, his brows tightly knitted. Lewis looked down at the bitten man. A tired sigh escaped him. "Does this crap ever end?" he thought ruefully. Shifting his weight to the right side, he turned to the blond man. "What about you? Are you hurt?" The man shook his head, running his hand through his hair. "Just leave me and get out of here," Mike groaned, clearly in pain. "I can't do that, man," replied Chris, his voice breaking. "I can't lose you, too." The freckled man shook his head. "We're losing precious time on the lost cause. Look, he's not going to make it. We gotta go before more of those walkers show up." "I'm not leaving without—" His sentence was cut short when a gunshot rang through the bar. Lizzie stood with a handgun in her hand, pointed at Mike, who now had a bullet hole on his forehead, his body falling on the floor. "What in the world?" exclaimed Chris, a bewildered expression on his face as he fell to his knees beside his partner. "We can't keep wasting time," she said matter-of-factly. "Now get up and come with us." Lewis stared at the woman with wide eyes. Although her intentions were noble, her rash decision had definitely startled him. As Lizzie made her way outside, Lewis kneeled next to Chris and placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "I'm sorry, man," he whispered, taking a deep breath. "I know it's a horrible time, but you gotta come with us. After that gunshot, this place will be swarming with walkers." "I didn't even get to say goodbye," lamented Chris, tears welling in his blue eyes. The freckled man stood up, his hands at his hips. "Right now, you have to survive long enough to grieve him. I'll have to talk to Lizzie later." Chris accepted the words, planting a final kiss on top of Mike's head before standing up and following Lewis outside. Lizzie walked ahead of them, her assault rifle in her hands. Lewis made a point to walk beside the blond man, who kept dragging his feet with downcast eyes. Every few feet, a walker stumbled out of their hiding spot to approach them, only to be shot down immediately by Lizzie. Lewis shook his head, wondering just what in the world is she thinking. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the spot where they left Javi's car. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting a sky a bright orange. Lewis got in the driver's seat, turning the key. Silently, the trio drove away from the walker-infested town and toward the road. Barely half an hour later, after an agonizing amazing quiet drive. They pulled up at the Hilltop's gate. They got out. Chris took positively ghastly as he took in the wooden walls. Before they approached them, Louis stopped in front of Lizzie with a stern expression. "What in the world is that?" he whispered, attempting to keep Chris from listening. "Whatever do you mean?" she said, crossing her arms. "The merciless killing of that man," he exclaimed, throwing his arms in the air. "Louis, he was bitten," she stated, shrugging. "We were wasting time. And like you said, we don't have much of that." He opened his mouth to retaliate, but came up empty. Running his hands through his dreads, he started walking in the direction of the gate. He signaled the guard, who nodded and opened it up for them. Once inside, Maggie and Jesus were already rushing toward them. The woman looked at the disheveled Chris and frowned. "Where's Mike?" she asked. Chris looked up for the first time since leaving the town and sighed. "He was bitten," he said simply, looking at Louis for a moment. The freckled man silently pleaded that he did not divulge how it got down. And the blonde seemed to understand. We had to put him down," he added. "Dog frickin' got it!" Jesus exclaimed, kicking a tire that lay near the wall and storming off toward a tent. Maggie sighed, watching the man leave. She turned to Chris and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry about Mike, but I'm glad you're back safely." He nodded, turning and walking toward a group of people sitting around the fire. He took a seat and accepted a beer from a young woman. Maggie looked back at Louis, tilting her head. "Did you run into any trouble out there?" she inquired. Louis glanced sideways at Lizzie, who frowned and shook his head. "Nope," he reported. "Just sucks that we couldn't get them in time." "Well, at least you got Chris back," she consoled him. "If Mike was bitten, there was nothing you could have done." And this is where I will stop for part 2. Stay tuned for part 3 of Silver the Hedgehog Reads, Chapter 11 of The Walking Dead: Hope.